Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Danny Phantom. Okay, so this episode, Teacher of the Year, is a Lancer episode. This episode is about Mr. Lancer trying to get through to Danny about the importance of studying, because Danny winds up having to make up an important test, and also Technus is here as a villain, but he's not as important to the lesson as he was the last time we saw him. Essentially, Technus is doing something somewhat unrelated to what Danny's trying to accomplish, but is the main thread of the episode. But in any case, the episode opens up with Danny and Tucker playing a game called Doomed, which is an obvious parody of the Doom series. And Danny and Tucker are currently stuck on what the game is in the game to be level 9, and they're having a lot of difficulty because there's a player named Chaos who is essentially camping in the level and killing everyone, and essentially no one can actually get where they need to go because Chaos is just this big ass roadblock just sitting in everybody's way, and of course, Tucker and Danny are currently trying to formulate strategies to take down Chaos, but it does not wind up working out, and they wind up losing the game and having to quit. Which, of course, Danny is particularly frustrated because, as we find out, he borrowed one of his parents' inventions, an invention called the Fenton helmet, which we don't fully know what it does. Seemingly reads a person's brainwaves, because that's pretty much the only thing I can think of it doing, considering what we see it being used for. But essentially, Danny is using the Fenton helmet as a game controller, and that's pretty much the only thing we know it does. It can be used to control video games with your mind. That's about it. But of course, Danny is frustrated because he substituted the Fenton helmet for a game controller, thinking it would give him some sort of edge in the game Doomed. And frustrated, he proceeds to pluck the helmet off his head and chucks it across the room. Unfortunately, he's currently in the basement where his computer is plugged in, and in the process, he accidentally hits the on button for the ghost portal, once again releasing Technus into the human world. And Technus, of course, gloats about the fact that he's finally back and able to cause more havoc, but in the process, he kind of decides to change tactics because he sees Danny playing Doomed on his computer, and decides that would be a much more fun world to inhabit and try and conquer. And it's this point where Danny goes ghost and tells him that he's not going to let Technus near the computer, and insists that Technus is not going to be able to, possess the computer and overshadow it and take over the world like he did last time. Because that was a thing we'll get to that in a minute, but that was a thing he was established to do, but also, we'll get to that. I will explain that a little bit later. But of course, Technus does quickly overpower Danny with his ghost shield, wrapping him up in it, but in the process, he accidentally destroys the computer trying to fight Danny, and at a loss, Technus just decides to leave. And of course, this causes Danny to become frustrated, but realizes he doesn't really know what else he can do, and it's at this point, because as he finds out, he apparently spent all night playing Doomed, and was only now realizing this. So he realizes he needs to just go to school and solve it, pointing out that it'll just be a day of school with little to no sleep, and a rampaging ghost on the loose, pointing out that asking what the worst possibly could be. As it turns out, Danny wound up sleeping through what we later find out is a very important test, much to Mr. Lancer's chagrin and frustration. Obviously, Danny sleeping through a test, not great. So that winds up being the other main conflict of the episode. But in any case, after school, after Danny kind of very spectacularly fails an English test, Danny immediately calls Sam and Tucker after school so that they can go looking for Technus to see where he might be building his new mech. Pointing out that the last time he used parts of his dad's technology to create a body for himself, and just asked Sam and Tucker to keep an eye out for any floating machinery. And again, this is something I want to talk about because it wasn't officially shown in the previous episode where Technus was the villain, but Technus can overshadow technology instead of people. That is one of his powers. He can overshadow devices, but it was never officially shown in his official debut episode, because in his official debut episode, remember, he got sucked into the Fenton Weasel and exploded. So we never actually saw him use that power initially. It was just implied that was something he could do, and he never did it intentionally. It just kind of happened. But this episode, no, he's very deliberately doing that. But of course, it's at this point where Sam and Tucker also where Tucker and Danny start talking Doomed and about various strategies and other things, like in regards to Technus, and pointing out that they'll stalk it, like they're finding the 7 keys in Doom, like they're finding 7 keys in Doomed, and points out that Sam probably has no idea what you're talking about because they assume she doesn't play Doomed, which frustrates her because it's very condescending to assume she doesn't play Doomed. And that winds up becoming a very ironic twist later in the episode, because we find out a bit more that she does play Doomed. We'll get to that because it's really funny. But in any case, Sam eventually, despite her frustration, does discover a bunch of floating technology heading for the cemetery. So they follow Sam and Tucker. So they follow she calls Tucker and Danny, and they all gather at the cemetery. And of course, it's at this point where essentially what happens is Technus assembles a mech generally modeled after Chaos from the game. So I'm not gonna picture it because you guys already have the visual for that. You guys probably have a great idea what Technus is supposed to look like at this point. But it's this one where Danny asks Tucker if the mech looks familiar, and then proceeds to explain how when Technus came out of the ghost portal, he caught Danny playing Doomed, and then watched him play for a bit, and explains that he's now trying to model his latest mech off of some of the characters he saw from Doomed, and Tucker realizing that they can easily that also means that they can possibly employ some of their strategies that they used in Doomed. Can very easily, as they put it, send the sucker to level 0. But then also once again assume that Sam has no idea what they're talking about, and explain that level 0 is a glitch in the game with one entrance and no exit. It's essentially a level that is not supposed to exist, but you can get stuck in it. And but in cases at this point where Danny proceeds to go ghost, while Tucker uses his scooter, and they do a bit of a divide and conquer strategy to kind of attack Technus. And Technus once again gloats about how they're no match for his new form, about how they're never going to be able to beat him, but in the process, it quickly becomes apparent that their strategies are a bit too much for Technus, and Technus starts to wonder what exactly it is that he's doing wrong. At which point, Danny and Tucker proceed to explain how that Technus is no match for them, because he winds up using they're using their gaming strategies to take him on, and admits that he has no game. And Technus realizes that they're right, and that if he wants to actually stand any sort of chance against them, he is going to need to learn some new gaming techniques. And with that, he proceeds to self-destruct his mech, which explodes into a variety of parts. And of course, Danny and Tucker are happy because they realize that went way too easily, while Sam points out that they should really not go anywhere near the mech because he self-destructed and it wasn't really a quote-unquote defeat. But Danny proceeds to point out that they dealt with that's fine, they dealt with it, and that's nothing. The worst is that could have happened is finally passed. But unbeknownst to any of them, Technus then proceeds to overshadow Danny's Fenton phones that he was wearing to communicate with Sam and Tucker. And his ghost sense goes off, but he has no idea what set it off initially, because he has no idea that Technus has overshadowed his Fenton phones at this point. So he then proceeds to just go. He proceeds to shrug, thinking it's nothing, and they proceeds to go on his merry way. Meanwhile, Danny, in the process, later that night, points out to Tucker that they can easily employ their new strategy that they used on Technus to maybe take out Chaos. And initially, it seems like the strategy is working, but then it's revealed that Chaos anticipated their every move and proceeds to defeat them anyway, despite their new strategy. And this of course causes Danny and Tucker to both become frustrated, noting that Chaos seemingly has picked up on their moves. But Danny then proceeds to realize that he's pulled yet another all-nighter, and then realizes he needs to get ready to go to school. And he then proceeds to place the phones next to the computer when he was wearing them, because he literally just took them off. And once he's gone, Technus proceeds to leave the Phantom phones and goes into the computer, where he then proceeds to create a new form based on the characters from Doomed. And pointing out that his plan was a success, he now realizes that he's going to need to, that in order to actually play the game, he's going to need to figure out how to actually learn some strategies and things like that. But in any case, the next day, Danny goes to school, and he's obviously a tired wreck during the day when Mr. Lancer then proceeds to come over to them and reveals that he got an F on his test, which Danny of course is a little, which of course it's at this point where Mr. Lancer then proceeds to reveal why he's so hard on his students, and Danny in particular. He proceeds to explain how, as an educator, the greatest part he can do is know that his students are learning from him and actually applying themselves. So when he sees Danny gets an F, he realizes it's essentially Mr. Lancer getting an F as well. He's realizing he's failing as an instructor and is not doing enough to make sure that Danny is learning. And Danny of course points out that is fine, and that's just one stupid test, and that he won't have to worry about it. But it's this point where he reveals that it's actually their midterm. That's actually their quarter term exam, and it accounts for 25% of their grade. Meaning, it's either the midterm or the final. I'm not entirely sure, but the point is, if the midterm, probably the midterm, since they're still in school. But he points out that the midterm accounts for 25% of their grade, so Danny kind of needs to pass it, and then also notes that then also points out that that's a large percent. That's 1/4 if Danny's also failing math as well. But of course, this is this point where Lancer points out that he understands that the reason is that Danny hadn't been getting much sleep lately. So what he decides to do is he decides to take pity on Danny and give him a new midterm and create a new midterm retake exam, so that Danny can actually properly pass it and pass his class. And Danny, of course, is just a little bit annoyed by Lancer, but he does ultimately thank Lancer for the opportunity and leaves. Meanwhile, we find out that Danny still isn't taking the test seriously. He essentially brings Sam and Tucker to a cafe where he then proceeds to keep playing Doomed and continuing to try and perfect his strategies and a whole bunch of other things. And of course, Sam points out the obvious, that Danny really should be taking the test seriously, since he's very lucky that Lancer gave him a retake at all. So, but of course, Danny points out that he's just very lucky that Lancer isn't there to see him, and that what he doesn't know won't hurt him. But it's this point where Lancer is revealed to actually be in the cafe as well, and and of course Danny is initially surprised that he's there, but he then of course proceeds to explain how obviously Danny isn't going to be taking the test seriously on his own. So he realizes that he's going to need to make sure that Danny actually takes the test seriously. And with that, he then proceeds to escort Danny out of the cafe and into his car, and they drive off. Meanwhile, once again, Tucker is very adamant about the fact that Sam again doesn't play Doomed, and points out that she probably wouldn't understand it. So, but he proceeds to go on to play Doomed, which frustrates her because she keeps getting put down by Tucker and Danny throughout the episode, and she eventually storms off and leaves. Meanwhile, Technus is still in his current form and is still trying to figure out how to actually play Doomed. And it's at this point where Tucker comes to him in the game and proceeds to try and explain how the game actually works, realizing that Technus is a quote-unquote new player, and Technus doesn't reveal himself right away, which kind of plays in the fact that Tucker's being a little bit stupid here, but obviously Tucker doesn't know that it's Technus initially, because Technus is using a new form that doesn't resemble his main form. So obviously Tucker has no idea it's Technus, and this proceeds to explain to Technus how to play the game. And what we find out is that there are 13 levels of Doomed, they also ramp up in difficulty. And what we also find out is that Technus seemingly has access to his ghost powers in the game, which Tucker believes is some sort of cheat code or something, because he doesn't understand that Technus is Technus at this point. And of course, Technus finds it very interesting that he has his ghost powers in the game when Tucker has access to powers that Tucker does not. But eventually, Technus asks Tucker what the end goal of Doomed actually is, and Tucker explains that they have to get to level 13, find 7 keys, and open the door, which will open the grand prize and also grant them access to the internet. Which, of course, Technus then proceeds to proudly proclaim that that's what his plan is going to be. That Technus is going to conquer the game, make it through all 13 levels, and gain access to the internet so he can project himself all over the world. At which point Tucker realizes he screwed up, and realizing what he's actually done, realizes that he needs to figure out a way to stop Technus from reaching level 13. Of course, it is at this point where Danny's being escorted home by Lancer, and Lancer proceeds to explain that he realizes that what Danny's problem is, and Danny doesn't want to hear this, but Lancer proceeds to explain that what Danny's problem is that he's having a lot of trouble sleeping, and is spending too much time not staying in and actually studying. And he then proceeds to tell Danny that he knows 2 people who will absolutely help him with that. At which point it's revealed that Lancer at some point called Danny's parents ahead of time because both Jack and Maddie are waiting for Danny with an angry expression on their face when he comes home. And of course Danny is very upset about the fact that his parents are going to essentially force him to study. But of course Lancer then proceeds to bring him inside and tells him what's going on, about how Danny has a midterm that he needs to retake, and about how they need to help him study. But of course after leaving, they then proceed to express their frustration, pointing out that obviously they won't accept the fact that Danny has an F, pointing out that they are a family of geniuses, which means that in the house they get A's, and with Jack adding that it's essentially also a B- at the very worst. And of course then proceed to instruct Danny that until further notice he is not allowed to go out until he studies more, and that he's going to just focus on everything into studying after school. And with both Danny and, much to his surprise, Jazz objecting to this, pointing out that Danny has things he needs to do after school, obviously referring to his ghost hunting ability, his job as a quote-unquote as a superhero, of course. But with Danny also being extremely confused as to how Jazz knows that he has something to do after school. But then Jack proceeds to add that in addition to that, Danny is not going to be allowed to use any of his any technology or anything else until he actually passes his retake and actually gets a passing grade on it. And sure enough, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to get a call on his phone, and Jack proceeds to pluck it out of Danny's hands, tells whoever's on the other end is busy, and then proceeds to break it in his hands, which of course winds up being a problem, because the person who is currently trying to get in contact with Danny is Tucker. And Tucker is of course trying to inform Danny that what's happening is that Technus is loose and doomed and is going to access the internet. But quickly realizes he's not going to be able to handle it on his own, because he keeps trying to take on Technus, and his character keeps dying, and he keeps having to log back in, which is obviously costing them precious time. But it's at this point where Similarly, he's also on a conference call with Sam, also telling her, after what he realizes he can't get in contact with Danny, and proceeds to tell her what's going on, about how Technus is loose in the game, but also points out that he can't really handle it himself. But it's at this point where Sam then proceeds to reveal that she actually does play the game, and tells Tucker that she's got it. At which point we find out who she actually plays. She plays the player Chaos, which much to Tucker's surprise. But of course, it's also revealed that they can't. Even with the quote unquote best player in the game on their side, Sam and Tucker are still no match for Technus, who is able to use his ghost powers and both evades their attacks while also delivering some devastating attacks of his own. And unfortunately, they are unable to win in a fight against him in the game. But in any case, the next day, they then proceed to tell Danny they finally tell Danny what's happening in person, since they realize that he doesn't have access to his phone. And first and foremost, Danny is worried about the entire idea that Technus is loose in the game and is obviously going to continue causing problems, but is also more confused about the fact that Sam actually plays Doomed and didn't tell them. And of course, it's at this point where Sam proceeds to rub all of their taunting and other things and ignorance about how she doesn't play the game in their face, telling them that, yeah, she's a girl, she plays plays video games, what of it? And yes, of course, causes Danny to realize that they probably deserve that, but also proceeds to realize that they need to figure out a way to actually stop Technus, but also realizes that in order to do that, he's going to need to do good on his test and study, so he needs to at least but he also points out that he needs to at least get the test over with, and tells them that in the meantime, they should just hold off Technus as best they can and keep him from getting to the final level, while he deals with Lancer in his makeup test. But it's at this point where Mr. Lancer comes in and makes Danny go to his room so that he can study the test and also finally pass it. And of course Danny does that, but also admits that he'll try to keep in contact with Sam and Tucker if he can. But it's at this point where Lancer proceeds to kind of hold study session with Danny to help him learn the material of poetry and other things that he needs to learn. Danny is of course not particularly grasping it. But Mr. Lancer kind of recognizes that Danny is having difficulty actually grasping it and actually paying attention in general. So he proceeds to tell Danny a little bit of a story about how obviously he knows that he's trying to be he proceeds to tell Danny what's going on, about how as an educator it is his job to dedicate himself to his students, and he also proceeds to explain because of that he hasn't been able to see his quote-unquote sister in months, and he proceeds to show Danny a picture, but what we find out later in the episode is that it's not actually Lancer's sister. As we find out, Lancer just took a picture of himself wearing a dress and a wig, and tells everybody that that's his quote-unquote sister. So and of course, Danny proceeds to remark that he's 14 and that he doesn't care. And then Lancer realizing that of course Danny doesn't care, proceeds to get up and goes to take a break because he needs one. At which point Danny proceeds to take full advantage of the fact that Lancer is currently not in the room with him to boot up Doomed and message his friends about how things are going against Technus. And they message back that things are not going great and that they really wish that he could help. And of course, Danny also admits that he wishes he was there, but also points out that studying is being kind of a drag. And of course, Lancer, at this exact moment, walks into the room and does catch Danny playing Doomed and kind of bad mouthing his studying on the Doom chat boards. And of course, Danny proceeds to apologize, but it's this point where Lancer proceeds to kind of realize that Danny obviously doesn't care about the test, and then tells Danny that if he's going to just waste Lancer's time, that Lancer isn't going to help him anymore. And but it's at this point where Lancer proceeds to storm off angry, and Danny, realizing what he's done and starting to feel a little bit guilty, then decides to bite the bullet, turning off Doomed. He picks up a poetry book and then proceeds to go find Lancer in the hallway and proceeds to ask him a series of poetry questions so that he can actually properly learn how to study and do everything that he's supposed to do for the makeup test. And Mr. Lancer does appreciate that Danny is finally trying to put in the effort and scooches over so that Danny can sit down and keep asking him questions. And then meanwhile, it's at this point where we see kind of two little plot threads going on. Danny, of course, now has to. There's an A plot and a B plot. Where the A plot, of course, is that Danny has only a couple of hours before Technus makes his way to the internet and is able to become all powerful. But also points out that he can't really focus on that right now, and that he needs to focus on studying. And pointing out that Sam Tucker can handle it until he gets there. And with that, he then proceeds to. We then see a montage where Danny proceeds to, to pass his test. He proceeds to work hard, buckle down, and actually solve his test. And actually finish his test. While Sam and Tucker try to fight Technus, and in the process, Technus gains a new power-up, which gains him a spider abdomen for legs. And of course, Technus, noting the new upgrade, is overjoyed about the fact that it makes him more powerful, and continues to fight his way through the levels with his new power-ups, while also still retaining his ghost powers and being just as powerful as he was before. But eventually, Danny does wind up finishing his test and hands it into Mr. Lancer to grade. And what we find, it's at this point where it's revealed that Danny got a 91 on it. Much to Danny's joy, pointing out that he knew he could do it, but then he realized that, yeah, he did know he could do it. And he's very happy about that. And of course, Lancer is happy that Danny just barely got an A on his test, but also points out that just because Danny got an A this one time doesn't mean that Mr. Lancer won't be keeping an eye on him. And of course, Danny returns to sentiment, pointing out that he knows he'll probably do something that'll warrant Mr. Lancer to be keeping an eye on him in the future. And with that, he proceeds to snatch up his now A material test and proceeds to run out of the room excitedly. And Lancer, happy that he finally got through the Danny, and then proceeds to pick up the picture of his quote unquote sister and points out I have a sister that I'm not allowed to, I have a sister I'm not allowed to see technique works every time. But then also wonders why nobody ever figures out why none of the students ever figure out that it's just him wearing a dress and a wig. But in any case, Danny proceeds to race all the way home. Briefly shows his parents his test, telling them that he's not an idiot before racing into the basement. And Jack and Maddie are very happy that Danny passed his test, with Jack adding that he should probably give Danny his phone back, which is incredibly ironic because he destroyed it. But in any case, it's at this point where Danny proceeds to boot up Doomed and tells Sam and Tucker that he's finally there and he's finally able to kick Technus's butt. But they also point out that he's on level 11, and that Danny is never going to be able, and that Danny realizes he's never going to be able to get there in time. But also points out that he needs to hurry up because he's very dangerously close to getting the 7 silver keys and opening the door to the internet. And also points out that Danny, of course, initially tries to make his way through the levels the traditional way, but it's at this point where Sam and Tucker tell him to hurry up because they point out that Technus is using his ghost powers. It has his ghost powers in the game, and they can't land a hit on him. At which point Danny realizes he was being an idiot and finally realizes that he knows exactly how to take care of Technus. At which point he proceeds to use his abilities, his ghost powers, to overshadow the computer, and from this point his player character gains his appearance as Danny Phantom instead of his usual Danny Fenton appearance that he's been playing as. And with that, Danny proceeds to use his ghost powers in the game to race through all the remaining levels, and points out that he's very happy that he did that because his powers are he's realizing his powers are the ultimate cheat code. But he then proceeds to race his way all the way through Doomed, and eventually he manages to get to the final level, where by this point Technus has managed to not only fend off Tucker and Sam's onslaught for long enough to collect 6 of the 7 keys, and is about to insert the final one into the door. And he proceeds to gloat about how that now they cannot defeat him because he is Technus, master of technology, machines, and destroyer of worlds. But then Danny proceeds to add on in a voiceover that you should also add really annoying to the list of things, to the really annoying master of speeches to the list of things that he's known for. At which point Technus realizes that Danny has arrived to actually fight him, and quickly realizes that he's going to be outmatched. But even with his newfound ghost powers, Technus is really powerful. But it's this point where Sam realizes that there is a cheat that she knows a way to level the score, pointing out that she knows a cheat code that could help them. At which point she leaves to go activate the cheat code and gain the new abilities. And of course, Danny and Technus do continue to fight for a little bit, unable to actually, with Danny and Technus kind of sort of being evenly matched because Danny is unable to actually hurt him. But this is at this point where Sam then proceeds to reveal her cheat code, which is to turn into a giant tiki thing. And from that point, she just kind of flattens Technus, and Technus is unable to do anything against them. And now satisfied that they've successfully defeated Technus, Sam then asks Danny to do the honors, and Danny proceeds to use ghost powers to open the glitch worlds to level 0. And they then proceed to throw Technus inside. And Technus is confused, wondering where he is. It's this point where Danny explains. He's in level 0, a place with one exit, with one entrance, and no way out. And of course, Technus proceeds to yell at Danny, pointing out that once he gets out of there, he's going to never going to hear the end of it, and he is going to one day get out of there. But before you knew any of that, Danny proceeds to close up the entrance to the glitch level, and Technus winds up being trapped in there for the next several episodes, since we don't see him for a while after this point. Continuity-wise, we do not see him for a while. But in case, with that, they are very happy that they've defeated Technus. But then Sam remarks that they are now the first players to actually have access to the great treasure that's at the end of Doomed. And realizing that what they have, they proceed to place the 7th key into the door. But before they can open it, they are suddenly blasted and immediately defeated by another player. And all three, with Danny, of course, being ejected from the game because he was possessing the game, but they all then proceed to wonder what happens. And it's at this point where it's discovered that Mr. Lancer also plays Doomed. And he then proceeds to collect up the 7th key, and gloats about the fact that he's now successfully obtained the treasure, and but also realizes that he should not stop doing that out loud because he realizes he's in the cafe where he scolded Danny for doing pretty much the exact same thing. So yeah, as I said, this episode's a Lancer episode, but this is an episode where Danny and Lancer gain newfound respect for each other, since obviously Danny puts in the effort to actually be a good student, which makes Lancer happy in this episode. Obviously, that was one of the main sources of conflict throughout the episode. Obviously Lancer was upset with Danny about how he wasn't taking his studying seriously. He kept staying up until 5 a.m. playing a video game when he should have been focusing on his studies. He also obviously points out that Danny, of course, proceeded to waste his time by booting up Doomed while Lancer left the room during one of their study sessions. And eventually Danny decided to actually apply himself, and that wound up being the lesson he learned, that he needs to apply himself more. And pointing out that when he actually tries, he's actually really good. He is actually a really good student. He's not a CD student like he thinks he is. He's actually pretty smart and can pass his get his grades up. But and of course that's why the episode is called Teacher of the Year. Lancer is the one to ultimately teach Danny this lesson by demonstrating that Danny can in fact pass his classes if he does try. So overall, that's what the lesson of the episode is. And of course, Technus isn't as important to the message of the episode like it was in the last one, but he does provide incentive for Danny to learn the lesson, because obviously, in order for Danny to play Doomed, defeat Technus, and stop him from taking over the world and broadcasting himself all over the internet, Danny needs to pull his grades up and actually pass his retake. So he will not. As important for the episode, and doesn't really tie into the lesson. Technus does wind up serving as incentive for Danny to learn the lesson anyway, which I do like. But in any case, that is going to do it for my review of Danny Phantom. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion in the comment section down below. or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. And be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It helps support me. It helps fund future projects. I would appreciate that. Please go do that, especially this one, since this one is a big project that I'm working on, and I'm hoping you guys would help support me. But also, be sure and go and check out my Twitch. I am streaming horror games all this month, so please go check that. We're gonna be doing that this weekend, so all this month, go check that out. I've already posted a schedule, so you guys should know what games we're playing. But I'm excited to play more games for you guys, so please go do that. But and also be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. Well, more so playlists of the previous ones of these that I've done. So please go check those out if you have not. I worked hard on them, just like I'm working hard on this one, so I'd appreciate that. But yeah, in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.